Presents Meant to Share by Shoot-to-Thrill. A firm, heavy hand tightened on Peter's shoulder. He resisted the urge to dismiss it as nothing more than a deeply ingrained reflex. The touch was meant to be comforting and tender. He could feel it in the way it squeezed without too much pressure, how the thumb gently stroked before the hand moved away altogether. Steve's hand was not Tony's. While the comfort of the touch was there, accompanied by a sealed lip smile and a little wink, Peter would have rather seen the same encouragement come from his mentor. It might have eased his nerves a little. Not even an hour ago, Tony had done something similar. He'd squeezed the back of Peter's neck and ruffled the end of his head with a soft murmur, though ultimately a command, to stay where he was. New York was under attack. Apparently, villains didn't care about holidays or dinner plans, not even on Christmas. For a few seconds, Peter watched as every Avenger present at the table rose from their seats, faces more stoic than they had been and meals forgotten. Peter stood up too, though the same hand that had caressed him ground him to his place. "You're staying," Tony said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Peter, of course, opened his mouth to argue, but Steve interrupted him. "Tony, we need all hands on deck. Peter can come." Steve's kind smile had possibly made Tony angry, as Tony stared at his teammate threateningly. There wasn't a thing Tony despised more than people going against his orders. Both men stared at each other longer than necessary, each growing more tense as the seconds passed. "He can help us contain the witnesses for casualties. Come on, you know this." "But this was supposed to be his Christmas dinner," Tony refuted, as if that was reason enough for Peter not to help the city while it was in danger. It sounded almost petulant and borderline childish, even to Peter's ears. "It was supposed to be for all of us. We'll be right back." Tony shook his head. "I said no, Steve. Back off." The way Tony held himself made him look taller, intimidating. With one swift motion, he gently pushed Peter behind him protectively, and while Peter could, maybe, appreciate the sentiment, it was also completely unnecessary. The longer they spent arguing, the more damage was being caused to outside, and they needed to get going. "I can help," he interrupted. Please let me help." Peter saw the wheels turning behind his mentor's eyes, the barely contained betrayal of Peter taking Steve's side, the defiance of authority he portrayed, and the self-directed anger knowing they didn't have time for this. Peter never liked it when he inflicted that kind of hurt on Tony. Most likely Tony would retreat to himself for the rest of the evening and give them the cold shoulder in the only way he knew, throwing himself into unnecessary danger and making rash decisions. With a deep sigh that sounded more like a huff, he let Peter walk away in Steve's direction. "Just stay safe out there." Steve, for his part, made sure to give him the kind of support Tony would before the battle, while Tony remained distant. Peter had agreed to join the fight with only scraps of intel on who, or what, they were up against. He wasn't ready for the first blast that slammed into the Quinjet, violent and strong enough to throw everyone off balance. His spider senses flared just in time for the second hit, an instinctual tug that made him whirl around to shout Clint a warning. After that, the battlefield dissolved into pure chaos, blinding flashes of light, explosions and hits. The attacks came so fast, so unforgivingly frequent, that they could barely keep up. "Spider-Man, focus on evacuating," Tony demanded through the comms. He quickly moved from the surrounding buildings and assisted the officials already on the scene, as told. Right then, there wasn't an order coming from Tony that he wouldn't have done to keep his mentor on his side. The way things had ended back at the tower left a sour aftertaste. He'd already caused enough trouble going against him once. Though no real damage had been done, Peter disliked it with all his being, not doing what Tony wanted him to do or what he expected. It was like going against his nature. He wanted to make Tony proud. The villain and his men were nothing more than robots cobbled together from scraps, a crude but strangely effective imitation of Ultron. Though easy to destroy, they fought with relentless ferocity, their persistence bordering on infuriating. Each robot was unique, its weapons and attack patterns unpredictable. Where one fell, another emerged from the shattered remains in an endless self-replicating cycle. The solution, the team soon discovered, lay in disabling their core. Peter's gaze flickered to the edge of the chaos, where movement caught his attention. A group of teenagers huddled in hiding under the Christmas tree, just beyond the NYPD's crime scene tape. Either they hadn't found time to escape, or their curiosity had drawn them too close. Teenagers, Peter thought, the irony not lost on him. He was, after all, a teenager himself, one who spent his nights in a spandex suit. He needed to protect them, keep them safe. Peter sought Sam, as the other superhero was the closest to the ground beside him, but Sam didn't answer his calls. With a curse under his breath, quiet enough not to be picked up by the microphone, he pressed the sensor of his web shooters towards the lower tree branches and braced himself to swing. Midway through, something sharp and cold penetrated his side. His ears rang with agony, and it took Peter a few seconds to identify the sound as his own scream. Whatever had struck him had also sliced clean through his web, making him fall onto the ice rink. He hit the ice hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Momentum carried him across the rink, up to the boardwalk. He felt cold, cold, cold. This wasn't the time for his thermoregulation to start acting up, and yet Peter sensed his whole body freeze. The arrow, one of Clint's, he noticed, though he was 100% sure the archer hadn't been the one who fired it, had punched through him, its tip gleaming as it emerged from the other side. Damn it, kid. Spider-Man's down. I said Spider-Man's down. His eyes remained closed, afraid to look down to the pooling amount of blood on his side. Perhaps it had been stupid of him to have broken the end of the arrow to quickly remove it from his insides, expecting his healing senses to kick gear and start with closing the wound. But it had been clear moments after that his body was more worried about keeping him warm than keeping him alive. The childish part of him wanted to curl onto himself until he was nothing more than a pill bug. His wound didn't allow it. Spider-Man, status. Hurt, he said, barely above a whisper. What else? Cold. We're sending help, okay, kid? Stay right where you are. Steve spoke, his voice interrupted by subsequent gasps and punches. The voice still held a softness around its edges, comforting Peter as much as possible. It wasn't like Peter could move, or had any desire to do so. Then, Stark, I need you to keep working on dismantling the software. Do not change position. Like hell I'm listening to you, Rogers. My kid is hurt. God damn it, Tony, he is not your kid right now, you understand? He is Spider-Man, and the rest need you. When Tony landed beside him, his boots skidded briefly on the surface. He dropped to his knees in an instant, the faceplate back to reveal raw concern etched deeply into his features. His hands hovered over Peter's wound, trembling as though afraid that even the slightest touch might make things worse. It seemed like shock had rooted him in place, and he couldn't act on it. Hey, it's okay, you're okay. Tony snapped out of the momentary haze, his hand steady as he pressed down on the wound. Tony, hurts. I know, buddy. Tony's jaw tightened, his brows furrowing as they darted the injury and Peter's pained expression. I'm going to carry you, okay? Take you to the Quinjet. He gently scooped Peter into his arms, cradling him against the chest with a tenderness that didn't match the urgency in his movements. Peter bit his lip with unrestrained force, the blood from his mouth damping his chin under the face mask. Pain spurted from his ribs, it burned and scorched him from his insides. Tony was careful with his movements, tried to be, but they were still the middle of the fight, under the kill zone, and Tony's priority was to get it inside the Quinjet. His movements were fast and brusque, accidentally hurting Peter more. Once inside, Tony set Peter down on a cot and covered part of his body in a thermal blanket. Why is the blood not stopping? Tony inquired with a raised voice. His hands hovered over Peter's frame as he looked for any other injury. I'm gonna need to cut your suit, see where all the blood is coming from. Tony turned to grab a pair of sharp and long scissors to cut through the heavy material. Dizzy from the blood loss and blinded by pain, Peter was conscious enough to know that would be a terrible idea. Panic increased his heartbeat faster than getting shot by an arrow did. Peter would be screwed if this was how his secret got out. He stopped Tony with a trembling hand, his strength barely there to be able to detain him. If Tony helped him, his deepest secret, the one he'd been trying to keep away from the team for as long as he'd been part of, would be revealed in the worst way possible. Were it any other person on the team, Peter liked to think he would deal with the consequences better. But Tony, he deserved more than that. He deserved an explanation. "Can you ask Tasha? I need Tasha," Peter gasped out. Right now, Natasha was his safest option. "I'm right here, Pete. You're gonna be okay." "Please," Peter nearly begged. He was losing his composure as each second passed, and he didn't think he would last being conscious for much longer. "Is this about earlier? Kid, please, I'm not upset at you." "No, I just really need Tasha to help me." He twisted in his place. "You need to go out there and help the team. Please ask her to come." After some hesitation, Tony relented. He brought the microphone from his mask closer to his mouth and said, "Nat, Peter's asking for your help. Can you?" "I'm on my way." "This is ridiculous. You're still bleeding. Why haven't your freaky powers done something about it already? We need to take you to the medbay now. If I fly you, we'll get there sooner." Helen Cho was a better option than Tony, so was Natasha, but if he thought about it, Helen had the legal obligation to tell Tony about his secret afterwards, in case something about his injury compromised it. Natasha would help him. She would understand. "I'm here." The spy's voice echoed on the Quinjet. Her long hands took the scissors from Tony's grip as she knelt beside him. Natasha stared at both of them, her gaze lingering on Peter for the most part. It was like she knew, with his panic-filled eyes and the tears that threatened to fall, that Peter needed for Tony to go away. "Tony, I got this. Sam and Steve have already got control of the situation, but they need you for the mainframe." Peter's cold and bloodied hand was taken away from his stomach with a tight grip, his fingers intertwining with another. Even bloody and dirty, Peter recognised it as Tony's, solely based on the calluses and scars that adorned it. He held the hand tight while his eyes met his mentor's. There was grief in them, pain for both seeing Peter hurt and Peter sending him away. Then Tony leaned forward to press a kiss to his forehead, followed by a deep sigh. "You're going to be fine, Rue. I'll be with you as soon as I can." "Tony," Natasha urged. "Go." "Thank you," Peter whispered. He hoped that by the time this was over, he'd come up with a good excuse to explain this mess. "Peter," Natasha said, voice soft. "Tell me what's wrong." Natasha was more effective than Tony. She grabbed the first aid items she needed from the shelves and requested Friday to show her his vitals. "I was impaled. I broke the arrow. I can't stop bleeding." A long shiver ran down his spine, more from exhaustion and pain than the previous cold weather. For just 1 second, Peter thought he'd gone through the easy part, recite his injuries chronologically and concisely. Then came the truth. Would it be better if he just told her, just as factly as his injuries, rip the band-aid off and move to more relevant things? Or should he treat it like another coming out? The longer the time passed, he was running out of options. By the time he'd perfected his speech, Natasha looked at him impatiently. Tony said he needed to cut the suit to see the wound." "So what do you need me for?" An amused glint showed in her eyes. "You didn't want Tony to see you without clothes, but you're fine with me doing it?" "Just when you do, you'll understand." He averted his gaze, his eyes awfully curious to the screws on the ceiling. Natasha began to cut, angling the tip away from his body. "Peter Parker, do you have a hidden tattoo?" "No." "A belly piercing?" "Please, Tasha, just..." A final snip made the tight-fitted fabric snap and reveal what lay underneath, from his neck to his lower belly. Despite his torso being covered in blood, the black contrast of his binder was very hard to miss. His ribs ached, both with one side being crushed, but also by the excessive rasping breathing. The binder held his ribs in place to the point it felt like it was cutting his circulation. It was also really embarrassing to reveal himself this way. He would have expected less flashing. Oh. It took Natasha a few seconds to process the information. Peter could see the wheels of her brain turning, discerning, planning, though ultimately her main focus was to put pressure on the wound. The sight must have been atrocious, a hole carved on his side, no bigger than 9mm, through and through. Peter knew from experience how cold-headed Natasha could be in unexpected situations. She acted fast on her feet and was one of the few from the team who actually thought of a plan before she followed it. That being said, the erratic behaviour the spy presented was nothing short of a Tony and Adderall scenario. Shaky hands, too much blinking, too little words. She poured the antiseptic solution carefully over the wound, ensuring it coated the torn flesh and seeped into the injury. The excess liquid trickled beneath Peter, pooling on the surface beneath him and flushing debris from the other side of the puncture. Peter sucked in a sharp breath as the stinging pain lit up his nerves, sharp and overwhelming in a way that made him grit his teeth. "We need to get the Quinjet in the air and get you to Helen," Natasha said, moving away from him and to the controls. "You're not going to say anything about that?" I'm not too good with words, you know," she winced. "But you know this team loves you, right? And that you being trans..." The usage of the word being thrown so freely made Peter's heart quicken. He should have guessed Natasha wouldn't toy around with something as simple as words. "Won't put a stop to it. It won't make Tony stop loving you if that's what you're worried about. No one on the team will look at you differently." "They already do," he whispered. "They still see me as a kid." "You're still a kid, Petrushka." Looking troubled, she took her time to comfort him, running a hand through his hair. "But we understand. We just want you to enjoy the other side of life that doesn't include aliens and manic robots for a little longer. If the robot's hit would have been a few inches higher, the arrow would have gone straight into your heart. No one wants to see Peter Parker's life end so soon." "No, it wouldn't have. The binder's pretty thick," he attempted to joke. Natasha just looked at him sadly. "I might not know much, but I hope you know what you're doing. Something tells me you shouldn't be wearing a binder while patrolling." "I usually don't. The suit's pretty constricting. I didn't have time to change." "Good. Let's take you to Helen." "Promise me you'll stay with me?" "Of course, Petrushka." Natasha kept her promise of staying with him once the Quinjet landed on the tower. She covered the top of his body with another blanket when Helen's team came to take his vitals, and she insisted on keeping it on, safely tucked on his sides under the order to the nurses to leave the three alone. Helen's reaction was different from Nat's, but by no means negative. Helen smiled softly, with just the slightest hint that she'd always known. Both Helen and Natasha worked on healing the wound and getting Peter warm. With that being taken care of, his body finally felt safe to do the same. By the time they finished, Natasha helped him change into a warmer hoodie, one of Tony's, instead of the uncomfortable hospital gowns, and had also managed to sneak a box of chocolate milk for him. Peter's eyes fought to stay open. He was exhausted, in pain, and desperately wanting to see Tony. He didn't know how long he'd been under Helen's regenerative cradle, nor how the rest of the team was doing. They were probably still out, otherwise Tony would have already been there. "You were lucky today, you know," Natasha murmured from her seat beside his bed, her hand around his wrist. "You could avoid telling Tony about this, and he wouldn't notice. Though I suggest you tell him. He would like to know." Peter hesitated. "I was planning on telling him tomorrow, actually. My gift, I was going to give him a photo album with my childhood pictures. He was bound to ask questions then, and I..." "You could still do that." He could, but he didn't exactly want to. He couldn't imagine a worse possible way than giving someone else a gift while he himself was tied to a bed. Christmas was supposed to be spent with loved ones huddled for warmth on the sofa, drinking hot chocolate that came from a ceramic pot rather than plastic boxes. And what about the rest of the team? Peter had worked hard making each person a personalised gift, custom made. "Then we'll bring the gifts here," she said. Like that answered all his problems. He tried not to show his disappointment when he said, "We could." "I want it to be clear that I'm not pressuring you to do anything you don't want to do. If you decide to wait, your secret will be safe with me, and I will never do anything to expose you." Natasha smiled, her eyes uncharacteristically soft. "It can wait." "What can wait?" Tony asked from the doorway. He was a mess. Pieces of his suit clung to his frame, though pretty much half of it was missing. Some parts appeared to be stuck to his body, and his formal suit and ties seemed like they'd seen better days. Tony didn't seem to care, as his eyes were completely trained on Peter's figure on the bed. Christmas presents," Peter said. There. Technically not a lie. "Absolutely not. We're opening them on the day God intended." He approached with a slight limp. "Do you have any idea how many things I bought for you? Friday estimated it would take you 53 minutes to unwrap them all, not taking into consideration what the rest bought for you, or what Santa gave you too." "Tony, Santa isn't real." "Tell that to the big man in the red suit who stole all my cookies." Peter arched his eyebrow. "Are you sure you're not talking about Happy?" "It's possible." Tony scrunched his nose. "So, what do you say? I can send the team to grab them. They would all want to be here anyway." "No, Tony, wait." Denying Tony something for the third time in the night felt more painful than the literal stabbing he'd just gone through. It made his stomach tie in knots and his hands shaky. In a sort of inhuman way, Peter watched as Tony's excited spark dimmed from his face. Tony turned and twisted on himself, looking unsure in a way Tony never dared to. Peter knew from experience his mentor only allowed a small group of people to ever see him like this, open and vulnerable. It felt a little strange for a teenager like him to be part of that group, though it only made Peter want to try harder, to give Tony the same level of reciprocity when it came to his feelings. Peter turned to Natasha, her hand still on his wrist. "Tasha, could you bring my gift for Tony here?" Then he turned to Tony, a hint of shyness in his voice. "I would like it if we only opened that one here. The two of us." "Of course, Petrushka." As soon as Natasha stepped out of the room, Tony took her seat next to the bed, claiming Peter's hand, though instead of resting his hand on top of Peter's, he linked their fingers together. Tony looked around the room to the machines and Peter's figure under the blankets, like he wanted to check if Peter truly was okay. "Are you okay?" Tony asked, in lieu of checking. "You scared me out there." "I'm fine. Are you? You look like you've been hit by a truck." Tony snorted. "I'm okay too." A short silence fell around them. "Listen, about earlier, I know you've had enough of me telling you not to do something and then doing it. I get it. I don't have a say about what you do, and I'm sorry if I've crossed that boundary again." He huffed. If Peter was honest, he didn't mind Tony taking a more of an authoritative role with him. It felt fatherly, good-natured. "You have to understand that it always comes from a place where I want to protect you, not because I don't believe you're not capable." Peter interrupted with a soft laugh. "Tony, I know." He shifted in his bed, moved to the side to grant Tony enough space to join if he wanted to. "I'm sorry for disobeying you earlier, and, for the record, I would like you to have a say, though I can't guarantee that I will always obey you." His cheeks flushed, and so did Tony's. Tony's smile was softer, adoring. Once Peter moved, Tony wasted no time sitting next to him on the bed, one arm coming behind Peter's shoulder, while the other remained intertwined with his hand. Peter rested his head on the crook between Tony's chest and shoulder. Natasha came back moments later, holding the small box wrapped with tiny Iron Mans dressed as Santa. Peter liked the wrapping. She looked unsure, a flash of guilt behind her eyes Peter made sure to swipe away with a shake of his head. This had been his plan for a while now. Admittedly, the part where they did this on a hospital bed hadn't been included, but it felt almost fitting for them. A place where vulnerability was at an all-time high. I told the team that you needed to rest, though I'm sure they'll want to visit you soon. I'm going to check with Helen if you can sleep on your own bed tonight instead of being here. Thank you, Tasha. She left with the softest click of the door, leaving Peter and Tony back to where they were. Peter turned to face Tony. There's a reason why I panicked on the Quinjet when you were trying to help me, and I'm sorry if my initial reaction made you think I don't trust you. It's just not how I wanted you to find out. Find out what? Peter extended the gift with steady hands, though his heart wasn't as calm. He knew all too well about Tony's aversion to people handing him things, and he did it anyway, because Tony always made an exception for him. Peter felt it was his turn to reciprocate. Tony accepted the package without hesitation, his movements deliberate as he began to unwrap it. Normally, Peter might have grown impatient at the unhurried pace, but tonight he welcomed it. His stomach churned, tight and restless, as though every second stretched into infinity. At the same time, the slowness gave him something else, a few extra moments in Tony's comforting presence, moments he wasn't quite ready to let go. He truly believed Tony would accept him, but he wasn't so sure about what this would mean for their relationship going forward. Would Tony still treat him the same, or would he change? Finally, Tony held the photo album in both hands, his gaze lingering on the mismatched letters spelling Peter Parker across the cover. If Tony were to look closely, he might notice the faint residue of glue, where a sixth letter had once been after the R in Peter's name, or how the 3 letters had been replaced. But Tony's focus shifted to Peter, his expression curious, yet soft. A photo album? He asked, tone light. You said once you wish you'd met me earlier so you could have baby pictures of me around the tower, Peter explained, his voice quieter than usual. When Tony made that comment, it had been a joke, a claim about Peter still having baby cheeks and how Tony would have loved to see them on a baby version of him. But now, standing here, Peter felt oddly delicate. Tony looked at him fondly with an emotion he couldn't quite describe. Go ahead, open it. Tony carefully flipped the cover open. The first page revealed photos of Mary and Richard Parker, a tiny black and white wedding photo, a snapshot of a positive pregnancy test, and a candid shot of what must have been his father's elated reaction to the news. The next pages were similar, filled with tender moments, her mother's growing baby bump, and eventually the first blurry photos of Peter's birth. Look at you, Tony teased, his tone laced with affection. All ugly and wrinkly. Thanks? Peter had to thank his parents for keeping his hair short during the first years of his life. The thing about the photos is that you wouldn't suspect something odd if you weren't looking for it. It was clear that for Tony's eyes, all he saw was a kid, a boy, whose parents had the tendency to dress him with a lighter colour palette, and occasionally a piece of clothing that looked strangely similar to a dress. Tony saw a baby who had equal amounts of animal toys and dolls, a baby who a younger May Parker liked to put his hair in little pigtails. Peter had a love-hate relationship with those photos. On one hand, they brought a wistful sense of nostalgia, tied inseparably to grief for parents taken too soon. On the other, they captured someone he no longer was. The girl in the pictures shared his intelligence, his humour, but she lacked the spark he now carried. She was a part of him, yet not a whole. Tony took his time with each page with an uncharacteristic quietness. He grinned at the cute ones, chuckled at the embarrassing ones, and shot Peter amused looks that only deepened the knot in Peter's stomach. Then age 5 came, and the truth was harder to ignore. Tony turned to a page featuring a little girl with a toothy grin, her smile wide despite the gap where her front teeth should have been. She wore a pastel dress, and her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Tony blinked, his brow furrowing slightly. Oh, he said, his voice light but curious. Who's that? Peter swallowed hard. That's me. Tony didn't react at first, his face calm and neutral. Okay, he said, accepting the revelation without hesitation. But as he turned another page, his expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful, almost analytical. By the time he flipped to the next, something clicked. He closed the album gently and turned to Peter, his eyes warm but searching. "This was you too, wasn't it?" Tony asked softly, holding Peter's gaze. Yeah. Tony was silent for a moment. "But it wasn't who you are, was it?" No. Okay. Tony nodded, then took a deep breath. "Peter, these photos are incredible. I love that you gave me this, but if these pictures don't represent who you are, then I don't need them. I'd rather have 1,000 pictures of you as you are now all over the tower than to hold on to something that doesn't feel true to you." Peter felt a lump rise in his throat, his emotions swirling too fast to untangle. He leaned into Tony's shoulder, his voice muffled as he murmured, "I'm showing you these because I know you wanted them. They don't make me uncomfortable. That girl in the pictures, she's not who I am now, but without her I wouldn't be me. And I wanted you to know. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. You're the most important person in my life, and I hope you can accept me." Tony wrapped an arm around Peter's shoulders, holding him close. His voice softened, cracking just slightly. "Always, kiddo, always. You're the most important person in my life too." Despite his attempts, Peter couldn't suppress the sob that escaped him. He was tired and hurt, but most of all relieved. He felt the immense weight of his secret leave his shoulders, and now all he could feel was Tony's strong hold, protective and caring. "I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" The words hit Peter square in the chest, making him cry harder. He nodded. I know. Thanks for everything." "You don't have to thank me, Rue." Tony nuzzled his nose on Peter's temple. "It comes with the job of caring about you." "I can still thank you for being great." Tony smiled. "Thank me once you open your gifts, yeah? You're gonna love them." Thank you for listening. I really hope you enjoyed. Have a lovely rest of your day.